You have a display dongle? Yes.
Yeah. Missing story on this presentation. The email or
I thought
it's not on the.
it's on the thing. I put it on
Oh, but I'm missing somebody's.
Job's.
I got Job's.
Oh, you have? Oh, he's Job. We have yours. So you're going to be okay to present?
Yeah, I can present.
Okay.
I guess I have them all. That's 4 presentations. 4. Okay.
And the chair slides?
Oh, there's 4 total. Right? Yeah, 4 total presentations, including chair slides. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sweet. I'll upload them. Let's do that. This turns off the speaker thing.
Which side does it go on?
Okay, it was on that side.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for telling me how to use my Mac. Refresh my this today.
Good morning. This is the Grow meeting. If you're here for Grow, that's terrific. If you're here for something else, you're probably in the wrong room. If somebody in the back could close both doors, that would also be great. We'll have slides momentarily, and it's okay. Oh, and I'll get the blue sheets out in a minute.
I'll do it.
Yep. Thank you very much for closing the doors. Slides. All right. I'm Chris. This is Pete. We're your regularly scheduled Grow chair peoples. There's a note well. You've seen it at least 3 times already this meeting. Not this particular meeting, but this week. Here's the agenda. Anybody have anything else they want to add? Yes.
BGP reject.
BGP reject. Okay. We'll add that into the list. You want to do that right after your large communities?
We don't have time.
What?
We don't really have time. Do we?
Nah, we got about 5 minutes. Okay. So we have some draft status stuff. We had 2 more grow filtering and leak problem detection made it out of the queue into RFC state. BGP G-shut is the perennial waiting on references. That's fine. RPSL via, I think this is the status from last time. There hasn't been an update. We need to go poke the authors for that. BGP reject, Job is going to talk about. I think he's going to ask for working group last call. Maybe? And add paths is in last call, so no question mark there. These other 2, the IXP route server operations and Grow BMP are both RFCs today. And then we have other folks for presentations like Job, who's up first. Yep.
Oh, I don't.
Yep. presenters stay in the box. Here's a clicker, catch. Stay in the box so Medico can see you, please.
Can everybody hear me properly? Excellent. If somebody could close the doors, that would be... Oh. I would like to talk about a draft we've been working on called Default IPv4 and IPv6 Unicast eBGP Route Propagation Behavior Without Policies. Yeah, is this better?
Perfect.
Okay. We've noticed that over the years there have been many BGP implementations that have different behaviors out of the box when you configure the bare minimum to bring up a BGP session. For instance, on Cisco iOS, all that is required is that you put in a neighbor statement defining the remote AS, and that's it. And then the session comes up, and by default, iOS will announce everything it has and accept anything it can. On Bird, it will accept anything but not announce. On Juniper, it will accept anything, announce anything. On XR, it will accept nothing and announce nothing. And there's all these different behaviorisms. And over the years, we've discovered that it is highly undesirable to be promiscuous when you set up the session instead of having a more restrictive approach. So this is where the reject draft originated. And the following slide shows you what reject really is. This is it. All we advise is that by default, you do not accept any routes without a configured policy. And by default, you do not announce routes unless explicitly configured to do so. And one very pragmatic example of what this would prevent on iOS, if you copy-paste a snippet of config and you don't copy-paste fast enough, the session can already be up before the session is protected with configuration. In modern operating systems, this is of course less of an issue because you can do an atomic transaction with the configuration system. But BGP reject, what it does, it solidifies this desired behavior in a document. Before we can go to last call, there essentially is one outstanding question. In version 1 of this draft, the default behavior of rejecting anything if there is no policy configured applied to all APIs and subsequent APIs. But then we came to realize that this may or may not be the desired, what we're trying to achieve, because Jared and I approached this from an internet routing perspective. Nokia did an inventory of all the APIs they have today, and it's roughly 20 APIs and counting. And it is really a question to the working group: should this restrictive behavior be confined to the V4 and V6 unicast address families, or should it cover anything? I personally think that reject should be for V6 and V4 unicast. It's easy to implement and it aligns with some of the implementations out there. And if we have it applied to any address family that exists now and somewhere in the future, it might lead to complications and restrictions on innovation. But this is the one question I have left, and I would appreciate feedback from the working group, either now at the microphone or on the mailing list. And once we solve this question, for instance, by reaffirming that the current version that specifies V6 and V4 unicast is sufficient, then we can move to last call. Thank you.
Jacob Heights, Cisco. You did mention iOS, and we are well aware of the problem, which is why when we designed XR, we fixed the problem. However, right, we cannot change this because it would break other people's configs. So I noticed you had in there a little sentence in there that says you cannot have a separate knob to do this.
No, you must not require a knob for the default
Right.
secure behavior.
Yeah, that one.
And that sentence is there essentially as a loophole. So if people want the old behavior, you can configure something like eBGP insecure behavior or eBGP promiscuous behavior. I see some no nodding.
Yeah, we're not going to comply with this unless you fix that sentence.
You mean iOS will not comply with it?
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
If
we
Cisco
can't
is
do it. It's
unwilling
too
to
hard.
provide secure software for the internet, that concerns me.
Yeah, understood. Well understood. We've understood this for many years, but
We would
We
like
have
to
an
see it
overriding.
fixed.
For me personally, a motivation to have this document published is that at least going forward, we have something to reference to as this is the desired behavior. And I understand that implementations that are no longer really updated may not comply with it. But going forward, I would strongly encourage implementers to abide to this document. You were first.
Hi, sorry, Amod Vyavaharkar from Cisco, and I come from a different perspective. Our data center customers, they want simplified config. So now this is going to put an additional burden on them to get their sessions up.
Yes.
Jeff Haas, I'm strongly sympathetic with this, just like everybody else in the room. But just like Jacob, no, we can't change the core default behaviors because people rely on this again. Because this is BGP, it's used lots of places. If it's allowed to be done via a top-level knob that just gets configured, that's great. If operators care to find some way to get the people who are actually doing the software packaging on things to get a knob basically enabled in a given package. So for example, you download Juno State by default, then you'd get this behavior as something that we could do as a default. But our generalized packaging system right now does not vary things like that. So we would not be able to comply with this document if the existing stanza in there says that you cannot have a knob. It just cannot be done. If you want to figure out some way to change that behavior, we can go with that.
Of course, I'm willing to discuss it. And I would also like to make it clear that in the discussion that how we ship this in products and whether we agree with the document as it is can be two different things. Because for instance, Nokia and Bird have committed to applying to this behavior, and their approach is just the next major release, and we'll put it in the release notes. And I guess there are various opinions on how you ship this to customers.
The more customers you have, the bigger pain in the ass it becomes.
Of course.
My general observation is going to be that anything that is a broad change of default behavior, it doesn't have to be this, is going to be this class of problems. And you will have to find some thing, whether it's packaging or some other behavior that alters that.
What about V4, V6? Do you?
Everything. I think this should be done by everything. Making somebody have allow all for L3 VPN, for example, seems perfectly reasonable. But again, this is partially a problem of, as I put it in a different presentation, blast radius. AFI-SAFIs, if you have to configure L3 VPN, that's a bit of explicit configuration, and generally you mean it when you do it. In the case of internet, the scope is a lot broader.
John Rinkova. Yeah, it's a great idea, but I agree with previous speakers that migration plan should be considered, right? I do not think just putting it in release node for any vendor would actually help a lot. So migration might be quite painful here. Yeah, so it's a serious problem, and I don't think we should decouple the discussion yes, it's a direction we should go, but we also need to think how we're going to get there. So people are not scared and do not break internet even worse by migrating.
Just comments to the actual question about the V4, V6. So it seems to me that if you wanted to cover other address families, then you would also cover IBGP. But since you're limiting this use case very narrowly to protecting the internet, I think this is, the current draft is totally fine as it is to just cover V4 and V6 unicast. On the point from the vendor.
The eBGP, we were very specific that
Right.
it only applies to
Right.
eBGP.
So I guess what I'm saying is if you were going to make a change to cover other address families, that change I think would have to be coupled with actually applying this for IBGP as well. So I would go either way, but I'm perfectly fine with the draft as is. The other point to the vendors, I guess, is you know, anybody who's gone through 12.0 to 12.2 or you know XR to EXR is used to really large major changes. And I think it's kind of funny that developers would stand here and say they won't do something. If it gets put into RFPs and RFIs by operators, then they will do it. So, you know, I guess I would say people should use their money to motivate.
Thank you for your comments.
So who in the room feels this is ready for last call? 1, 2,
3, 4,
Okay.
5, 6, 7.
Well,
So I think
it seems there was one specific sentence about a knob on that is related to the deployability, and I think we can work on that in the next 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because it's just one minor point that is left, and I would then, when that's resolved, then we can do last
yeah,
call.
I think we're close, so
Yeah.
to get it done before IETF. One more comment?
So Peter Lofberg, if you're going to make a change, but why don't you make it be? I mean, everything that has built in, you have to know what it's going to do. It's confusing, right? So if it actually turned off all AFI, if it actually turned off all outgoing and incoming and outside, at least if it behaved the same for all address families, I think that is better. And then the only thing you need is a knob that says, for this address family, do what, you know, turn on everything or something. But you don't want, I think it's confusing that you have to know by magic what address families is going to behave different from other address families, right? So if you're going to ask for a change, make it consistent with just the one you have at the bottom, right? And then it's up to the vendors to do different kind of implementation. But basically, if it turns off all the address families and then there is turn on the address family of bananas or whatever, right? That could be a one-line command. Then what the installed base problem, the IETF just has to listen to them and then go, we are very sorry that you have customers. It should cover IBGP too, right? Because the achievement, my assumption is that what you want to achieve is somebody plugs the box into network, you power it off and you start configuring it. It's safe, okay? Then it should do nothing to the network until you explicitly tell it to do something.
Jelinkov, yeah, I agree that covering everything is also actually simpler from a configuration automation point of view. It minimizes the chances of mistake. Yes, so now I have another logic. Shall I apply that policy in this case, or it's going to be fine, and so on. So just, yeah, consistent behavior is better.
I'd just like to echo.
Who are you?
Jared Mott from NTT. I'd just like to echo Peter's comments in that, you know, we've had drafts come through here about route leaks and other things, and this is a well-defined problem. This is a well-defined solution for the problem set. And if the vendors are going to have such a hard time listening to the operators on that this is a real problem and this needs to be fixed, then we're in a precarious situation as an industry if we're not going to fix the things that we have well-defined multiple times in this working group as a problem. It is an indefensible position to be here and say, we're not going to address this.
Is anybody objecting to applying this to any address family or any subsequent address family? Can you raise your hands?
I only object if you don't change it to IBGP, because eBGP is used in a number of applications that are very similar within the AS. So people do confeds, people use eBGP labeled unicast within themselves. So I expect that the EV, if you're going to change it to affect other address families, you've introduced a whole bunch of applications now that I think that the behavior needs to cover IBGP as well.
So we should change it to from
I guess
eBGP to
I'm
BGP.
good with the way it is now, or if you're going to switch it to other address families, I think it needs to also cover IBGP.
Does anybody object to including iBGP? Zero objections?
So I'm going to cut you off. I think we probably need a little bit more on the list, but I think it's a relatively small issue that should be able to be hashed out in hopefully in a matter of weeks. But I would, I think we can take it to the list based off the input unless there's some strong feeling. Hello?
Jeff, as final comment, I think it could be observed that the real thing that should be worked on here is less about this set of knobs and more about how do we actually deploy new default profiles for software that's existing.
So I think, yeah, like I said, we'd like to get it, I think we'd like to get it last call. So if we can try to wrap up the couple outstanding issues and then move on, be great. Thanks for
Good
your
feedback.
presentation.
Thank you. Large BGP communities?
We didn't get a presentation.
I emailed it twice.
All right.
Oh, they finally shut up.
Why don't we put you at the end?
Sure.
Sorry.
Do you have it?
I do. I'll push it up.
We'll go, is Sue here? John, is your partner in crime going to join us, or you don't know? You're not in charge today. Okay, that's fine. Should we, we'll delay till Sue gets here.
Can't delay too much.
Okay. Why don't we go with that then?
I can do my thing.
Do your thing.
Yeah.
It should be short.
All right. Despite the fact that at least one of the co-chairs for, oh, sorry, I'm Chris Morrow.
Closer, you gotta hold it closer.
I'm Chris Morrow. I know. I was also supposed to give some mic help to myself earlier. The title is a little bit maybe mean, but I think the point is it seemed like in go. Oh,
My
it's not.
laptop.
Sorry. So in the IDR working group over the last several weeks, there's been a long, say, 400 message discussion with a bunch of folks. Louder, better, more? More than 400. Okay, sorry. There's been a very long discussion, some kind of anger and faffing about for one particular issue, which is 4-byte ASN and how to use those if you also have a community structure for traffic engineering purposes with your customers. It seemed like during this conversation, at least in the IDR world, somebody forgot there might be a set of requirements from network operators about tools that they use in the network every day. At least one person in the mailing list, Jared, said it looked like maybe this was just a lost requirement, and maybe there are others. So I think Grow probably is the place that should say, here's a list of requirements that we care about for operating a network. We at least care about this communities thing. I couldn't come up with any others up through last night and this morning. So if I think part of the thing I'd like to say here is if other folks have things that they believe are important, it would be good to hear about that either on the mailing list or at the mic. And then to decide what we want to do about this. We can just say one Grow person says, maybe we don't really care to say much more about this. We're just going to fight this out every time. Or we'll inform our vendors, through our normal vendor process and hope that that gets fed back into IDR in some fashion to keep track of the things we actually care about to operate the network. I don't actually know what the right answer is, so I was hoping somebody else would stand up and say. I think, yeah. So should Grow care about this at all? I think maybe it helps, but I'm just one person. Nobody else wants to stand up and say anything? But now would be a time to stand up and say something if you want. Job?
Job Snijders, NTT. I have two comments about the communities. When the transition was made from 2-byte ASNs to 4-byte ASNs, I think either an incomplete inventory was done, which parts of the ecosystem are affected by that, and it should have been more obvious that the communities were constricted to 2 bytes and as such would need a modification of sorts. And another risk that I've seen is when a relatively simple idea from Grow goes towards IDR, they sometimes suffer from feature creep, and where what we wanted was a simple hammer, but we end up with this Swiss Army knife that is 1 meter wide. And I've seen a number of proposals get completely out of hand. So if Grow can sometimes put the brakes on things where we forcefully say, stop making this more and more extendable and do extensibility inside extensibility. We need this one tool, make one tool, because most things that come through Grow are centered around, we need one feature with one document number. So even if there's a language barrier, we can communicate with each other because there's only one way to solve this particular interaction between you and my network. And maybe that is something that we can capture in a statement of sorts or a design instruction that extensibility is sometimes not what we need.
Okay.
Hi, Bill Fenner, Arista Networks, one-time routing area director, maybe when some of these things should have been looked at. I think that rather than not taking things into account, IDR was expecting that they would be subsumed by other work, and this other work has just, taken 10+ years and not completed. And that's more optimism than anything else, I think. Like this is a straightforward problem. We need all sorts of different types of communities. Let's solve all those problems at once. It's not that nobody said, oh, we need 4-byte ASs in communities. It's like we need all sorts of things.
So just to be fair, right? The 4-byte AS document says that there is this use case for sticking 4-byte AS into communities, and that will be handled by this other draft called, I think, flexible communities, which essentially says 0 about this use case. So I think at the time people said, great, someone's gonna handle this. I'll walk away and do my thing. And it's not super important right now, so it's okay to walk away and do my thing. But then later on, like, it just never got picked up, which is your optimism.
Yes,
right.
That's right. That's exactly my point. But the tendency is to let these things grow and be, oh, we'll stick that in flexible communities too, because flexible communities is going to solve all our problems.
And that's the simple versus
right.
complicated or complex.
Yes.
Yeah, Joel Yegley. I think there's a bit of this that is a second system problem in the sense that we have this system, multi-protocol BGP, which especially in the interdomain case is actually quite successful at resisting innovation. And that's in fact part of the reason it still works is because people are actually unable to bolt new shit into it. So as operators, we have sort of a practical approach to that, which is that we look at what is the minimum possible necessary thing to employ, and we do that. But there is a vantage point where notionally these things are extensible. So any debate that looks at the system as though it is relatively flexible, I think misses an understanding of how it's actually employed in the internet and how long it takes to make changes that actually have substantive impact.
Randy?
I yield to the jabber room. Jeff, are you up here for jabber?
I got.
Oh, sorry. Look, it was operators who defined this 4-byte crap in IDR. So are you just confused which room you're standing in?
Could be.
This has been a long-standing problem. If you were frustrated, and I should be using the first person plural, I guess. If we were frustrated by not doing it years ago, which we were, the burden is on us for not having done it years ago. This is a load of crap.
K. Patel, Arcus. I think 4-byte AS was standardized a while back. I think where Grow can really help is when IDR progresses standards like 4-byte AS, they can proactively look into it and say what's missing from a deployment standpoint as a complete solution. And if we could do that collectively as a group out here, we would have done a large or a flex, whatever that was, 5 years back.
Okay.
John, go first.
John?
John Scudder, IDR co-chair. Yeah, so everybody who said everything already said good things, but yeah, if in an ideal world, when we did AS4-byte, we would have done a gap analysis and then thought through everything super carefully, and then been like, oh yeah, there's obviously this deployment case that will need to be fixed. And and therefore we know that we need to have this on running on some certain deadline. In reality, everybody is bandwidth constrained, and we sort of do what Bill said, which is we are optimistic and figure, yeah, we've got something in the hopper and it's proceeding as fast as it proceeds, and we'll definitely get there as soon as that thing actually gets shipped. So I guess my point is, just if you were at yesterday's IDR meeting, you realize that we're pretty much using all of our bandwidth already for discussion, and we've got another forum here for discussion. And one further point on that is, for better or for worse, IDR gets used for talking about internet routing, and it gets used for talking about all that other weird Swiss Army knife stuff that BGP is also used for. So our bandwidth is divided. This room has the advantage of being able to talk only about internet routing. Yeah, this is really just a plea from the IDR chairs to say, we assume that you guys have a little bit clearer focus on this one topic, which we certainly consider to be the most important topic for BGP. Help us retain our focus also. And tell us if there's something that's slipping. Thank you.
So one of the hi, I'm Sue Hares. Thank you. It's not like Peter hasn't seen me a few years. I'm Sue Hares, Huawei, in this hat, IDR co-chair. What John and I want to say, I'm sure there's a squatting code points moment in Job's previous slides. If you see situations where the administrative wheel for IANA or for code points needs to be turned, don't be shy. Come see your chairs. John and I really will deal with stuff on a one-to-one basis. Don't worry about process. Send us mail. We'd rather have the operational stuff work than worry who, what, when, where, why. We'll chase the process wheel for you, but please help us by contacting us, sending mail to the IDR list, anything so we can help you.
Thank you. Jeff. So Jeff has several different points. First one, RFC 4893, the one that actually did 4-byte ASs, says as specified in RFC 1997, these 2 octets encode the AS number. Quite clearly, this would not work for BGP speakers that use 4-octet AS numbers. Such speakers should use 4-octet AS specific extended communities instead. So the boogeyman of flex and wide communities was not specifically in the picture. And being one of the people that had the clue bat applied to my head about 2 years ago about, hey, people do 4:4, that conversation didn't happen until, in the grand scheme of things, extremely late. Because it's just never written down anywhere. It was in, in RFC. The format of that packet's been clear for years. People like Juniper allow you to configure arbitrary communities, and you could do this without even a registered code point. And one of the drafts I picked up when I was still in my Arbor days was to try to get a code point specifically around for carrying around 4-byte generics. But again, the clue bat got applied. I think it was John Heasley had finally said, hey, there's a :4 on the right-hand side too. We can't do this. And as here's what this could look like. It went into wide since that was the current generic Swiss Army knife that we had at the time. And totally agree, it was the wrong Swiss Army knife because that's not the primary purpose for that feature. So it got bogged down. I totally agree that should have gone in a separate feature. But one of the interesting observations we have from this whole interaction, you're asking about requirements. It finally was made clear 4:4 was the thing we needed, but that kept on coming up mostly in private emails. I think that the first public version of that conversation that I'm aware of, that I saw at least, popped out on Nanog, not IETF, not GROW. So requirements didn't really leak over to IETF beyond that conversation for a long time. And when it finally did, it didn't pop over as requirements, it popped over as, hey, here's this draft that actually does this. And oddly, the requirement sort of polymorphed from this, we need 4:4 for parity for 1997 to, hey, we're going to extend this now and throw an extra :4 on top of that. So you had requirements creep, already in that sense. So there wasn't requirement analysis and then transmission. It was, boom, here's a feature, implement this thing, damn it.
Okay, I think we have one more presentation after me, actually two. Two more. So Jared's the last thing. We can take up the rest of the list, though.
I'll try and be brief. Jared Motch, NTT. So I think that one of the lessons that I learned from this is that I went to my vendors as a proxy to reach the IDR group, and apparently that message did not make it through to the IDR group for a number of years. And that's a frustration that I carry today, and also a lesson learned from this is it's not as if the operators didn't approach people. I remember specifically approaching Jeff personally about this as well, saying, we have this problem, we need this fixed. And it certainly culminated in the past 6 months, or 4 months on the IDR mailing list, basically saying, no, here's the clue bat. Like, we have to address this now, because we've tried for years to address this directly with the vendors, and unfortunately, they did not hear the message and understand the urgency to the point that it became, I think, quite a big fire drill now. And for that, I'm sorry it became a fire drill, but I also wish that, we had figured this out, a couple of years ago, and that message had been relayed.
Yep, go Peter. You come to the mic while Job's running.
So this may be, I'm Peter Lofberg. This may be a typical Peter comment, but I think it's time to actually start some work in the IETF or the IRTF or somewhere to look at what are we going to replace BGP with instead of starting to adding, because it looks like my Christmas tree where I was trying to put 50-pound weights instead of those small things, and it's about to fall apart. Maybe we should start looking at put all the requirements in a new document and say maybe we need a new EGP to convey new things for the future of the internet.
Okay. 10 minutes.
And on that note, I would like to present to you a draft Martijn Smit and myself have been working on called Large Communities Usage. One of the things that has stood out from IDR discussions is that there's a perceived lack of clarity on how these communities actually are used by operators. And if we look at the 1997 document, which specifies classic BGP communities, it is accompanied by a document 1998 that gives a few examples or some hints of inspiration on how to use these communities. And this document will attempt to do exactly that for large communities. We all now know that large communities are essentially 1997 communities, but grown up to accommodate the years that have passed. Let me skip over some of this in the interest of time. A key element to large communities is that we make a strong suggestion how humans should talk about the community. Because if we're on the phone with each other and there's a language barrier, it is helpful that I am not expressing the community in, say, AS.dot format or hexadecimals, while the receiving side is used to it being comma separated or colon separated. And the most important part of large communities is that we have 3 fields. The first field is the ASN that is responsible for the subsequent 2 fields. And the subsequent 2 fields are called local data 1 and local data 2. And if everybody agrees that there are 3 fields, communication will be much easier between us. I've listed here some examples of things we could not do with the classic communities and that we can now do with large communities and their benefits. In classic communities, the global administrator field often was overloaded by using a private ASN in that location, simply because we did not have enough space, so we would squat on the private ASNs. Of course, this is not ideal because in cases of mergers and acquisitions or where you have multiple suppliers that use the same community but have different meaning, the thing could fall apart. So with large communities, because we have that third field that defines whose namespace this is, the first example is immediately resolved. And it is worth documenting that this is now possible and this is the desired design pattern. In the documents, there are many approaches to communities, and this is just one of them. And you will see that the document contains very little normative language because we're not trying to shove a mythology through someone's throat. We make it very clear these are ideas that you can either copy or modify or ignore. The design pattern that we've chosen to follow is where we separate between informational communities and action communities. The difference kind of lays in the intended audience. AS2914, when we send communities to our adjacent networks, 99% of the time, those are informational communities to inform the other network. This is where we picked up the routes. This is the relation with the entity from who we learned the routes. This is the, you name it. So the intended audience for informational communities is usually the downstream networks that will use that for their traffic engineering decisions. Then the other aspect that we have is action communities. And action communities often are sent by downstream networks to their suppliers to inform the supplier or vendor to perform a non-default action. If you announce a route to NTT, by default it will have no AS path prepending. By default there will be a certain local preference. By default this, this, and this. And if you want to change those defaults, that's where an action community comes in. Another aspect of the design pattern is that we advocate the method of me function parameter, with me being the global administrator, the AS number who owns the namespace, function being a number that refers to something that should happen. So for instance, a function could be prepend twice, or prepend only in North America, or only prepend on Sundays. And then the parameter could be a geographic area or a adjacent ASN, or something else. Again, we're not forcing anything upon you. You can do whatever you want, but this seems useful when you migrate from a classic community approach to a classic plus large community approach. And I would like to note that any routing policy that has a strong dependency on regular expressions, I consider that out of scope for this document for the sake of simplicity. This document, the intended audience is newcomers that got a 4-byte ASN from their RER and need to get their network going. And if you want to toy around with regular expressions and do overloading of fields and whatnot, that's fine. But if you realize you want to do that, you're probably already past what this document can offer you in terms of advice. So regular expressions in routing policy related to large communities is left as an exercise for the reader. This is also not an attempt to do any form of global product management. So for instance, if you would like NTT to perform certain actions when certain communities are sent, this document is not the place. Talk to your account manager. I've listed a number of examples in the document. It's not finished. There are, I think, 7 functions listed at this point in the document, and I think we can collect a few more use cases that are commonly used. So I would very much like your feedback on the bare minimums. And we're not looking for ultra complex, sexy examples. We're looking for the bare minimums to get a nice network going. Ta-da! Met the deadline. Time for questions.
Joel Yegley. As a consumer of this, of provider communities, as someone who buys a lot of transit, today we have to have a Rosetta Stone in our route management system to deal with the fact that we have particular intentions, and we would like to have those abstracted from every single provider's particular idiosyncratic way of interpreting this. The proposal here is actually kind of a radical improvement on that, because the only thing that I actually have to have in the Rosetta Stone then, if people were to implement this widely, is the provider's specific intentions, which is the bit in the middle. Because you know, the signaling around ASNs is now kind of rigorously specified. So I actually see this as like a huge improvement, even if you don't standardize the intent, right? I mean, standardized intents would be great, but everybody, you know, has their own different way of doing things, and some people have some kinds of intents and those are not universally supported, right, for business reasons or whatever, right? But yeah, I look at this and I go, you know, that's a radical improvement as a consumer. And I think it's, the audience for this signaling is not actually large transit providers. I mean, saying where you learn to route is great. I love that stuff from you guys, obviously. But it's actually people who buy transit, you know, who are not necessarily in this room. So I think it's like a huge improvement for kind of mid-level organizations.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll take discussion to the list.
To working group adoption.
Can I have a raise of hand who thinks we should adopt this draft? Yeah, we'll take it to the list. I think it's probably, it'll be adopted. So, but we'll take it to the list of always. Thanks.
So, Peter Hofburg, stupid question again. So would that mean that the community functions will be an IANA registration thing? No.
So this talk is about, my name is Sriram. This talk is about URPF. And what we are trying to achieve here is that, first of all, like many of us observe that URPF should be more ubiquitously deployed. RFC 30, BCP 38, BCP 84, but it is not. So one of the things we are trying to look at is what can we do? Can we make some improvements to URPF? So the main thing is if the ISPs have less of a concern that they might disrupt service for their customers, then the chances are that they may actually deploy it more significantly. So thanks for all the discussions over the last week or so on the list. It's been very useful feedback. In terms of like just a brief run through of what URPF is, you have the strict URPF where only if the prefix points to that particular interface towards that customer, only then you would accept a data packet from the customer with the source address in that prefix. So the customer has to have announced that prefix to the ISP on that interface. So strict URPF, as a result of that, it doesn't allow flexibility. Customer may have other prefixes which they don't announce towards this ISP. So those other prefixes might be denied when a data packet shows up with the source address in that prefix. And loose URPF is there. You would use it as a last resort. It's not very effective, and it's good for filtering out Bogon or Martian source addresses. Otherwise, it's not very useful for IP address spoofing. Now, feasible path URPF tries to do a refinement between those two. And in feasible path, you are not only looking at what is the prefix that does the prefix route point to that interface for routing in the FIB, but you are also looking at, are there alternate paths? Did the customer announce another prefix, perhaps deprefed by prepending? And if that could be also be pointing towards the same interface, but with a much lower priority. So in that case, what happens is it's able to filter in a more logical way. So multiple prefixes originate from the customer. One, they want the traffic to come their way on that link or interface. Another prefix, they deprefed it, but still feasible path URPF allows flexibility. Has logic that says, okay, if you did announce a prefix towards me, even if it's not my best path, I would still allow the prefix to belong to that source address. So that's feasible path URPF. But even with that, the ISPs are apprehensive that they might still deny traffic with legitimate customer source IP addresses, and particularly when you have multi-homing and asymmetric routing. So the question is, can we do some improvements to feasible path URPF? And that's what we looked at. And the goal, like I said, is to encourage wider deployment. So the key principles of the enhanced feasible path URPF that we have proposed is the algorithm can be roughly described as in these 4 steps. First of all, you create a union of all announced prefixes that have a common origin AS. And so at the ISP's routers, in the AS, with the various routers, you collect all the prefixes that have a common origin AS. And those announcements have potentially been received on different customer or peer or provider interfaces. Now you take that union and include that entire list in the union on the reverse path filter tables on all of the interfaces on which one or more of those prefixes in the union were announced. So this makes it quite a bit more generalized and accurate as compared to the conventional feasible path URPF. Because the ISP last point simply says that the ISP might choose to apply step 3 across customer interfaces only. Now we'll look at a few scenarios. And the first one, pretty straightforward, simple scenario. Two prefixes, the AS1 may originate data packets from either network P1 or P2 towards any of the two ISPs. But it announces only P1 towards AS1 and only P2 towards AS2. And in this case, clearly strict URPF fails because the data packet can contain a source address in P1 or P2. Feasible URPF also fails because nothing has been announced to P2 for P2 towards AS2 or for P1 towards AS3. Loose URPF works, but not quite desirable, and enhanced feasible path, as we described it, would work best in this scenario. The next scenario is where, in this case, the AS1 is announcing prepended deprefed prefixes also. So it has two prefixes P1, P2, and it announces both of them towards AS2 as well as AS3, and albeit like deprefed for traffic engineering purposes. So in this case, feasible path URPF works. And I mean, if it works, if something else happens at AS2, AS3, if they prefer customer route at AS3, let's look at AS2. If the customer route is preferred at AS3, then AS3 would choose P1 as well as P2 that are received from AS1, those paths, direct paths, and it would announce them both to AS2. In this case, if a data packet starts off at AS1, goes through AS3, and ends up at AS2, on that peer-to-peer link between AS3 and AS2, AS2 will not drop that data packet because it did get P1 as well as P2 from AS3. However, if AS3 prefers shorter path over customer route, then AS3 is not announcing, AS3 prefers AS2's path towards P1, and it is not announcing P1 to AS2. As a result, the data packet will get dropped at AS2. So feasible path, it depends which of those preferences are applied at the ASS2 or AS3. Loose URPF works, of course, but again, not desirable. Enhanced feasible path, again, works best in this case as well. A little bit more complex scenario. And what we are doing here is, what we are looking at here is, same AS1 has two prefixes, and it is in this case, it is again not announcing all prefixes towards all its ISPs. It's selectively announcing P1 towards AS2 and P2 towards AS3. So if you work it out, if you look at this, essentially what AS4 does with enhanced feasible path, let's describe that a little bit more carefully here with this example. So in enhanced feasible path, AS4 looks at all these prefixes coming in, it matches the AS1, so they have a common origin AS1. And now AS4 says, okay, I can now apply P1 as well as P2 on customer interfaces toward AS2 as well as AS3. So in this case, any prefix data can have any source address in any of these prefixes, P1 or P2, and they will not be blocked at AS4, whether they come in through those C2P interfaces or the P2P interface. So it works fully to appropriately treat the traffic in a fair way without blocking or without unnecessary blocking. So one thing I forgot to mention is, it would be nice when RPKI and origin validation takes off. And in that case, even if an AS did not announce a prefix that it owns, but it has a ROA for it, then the ISP can look up the ROA and add those prefixes to the list in the reverse path filter. And that will certainly make the reverse path filter a lot more accurate.
We have 1 minute,
Okay.
so if you want to take questions.
Yeah,
or,
let me stop and take one or two questions. Thank you.
Keyur Patel, Arcus.
We only have
I
one,
think
yeah.
what you're saying is that instead of having nice to have, you need origin validation for this to work.
No, not necessary.
Well, someone could spoof.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Someone could spoof the AS1,
Exactly.
and
Yes.
then
Yes.
this is off the
Yes,
bat.
I'm trying to mention that. Thank you. I mean, you should do origin validation as well as the best possible prefix filtering that you can in order to eliminate the bad ones. Yeah.
So while
Who are you?
Barry Green, Akamai. So while I'm glad you're looking at this, I think you need to take the work and step back a few steps, reevaluate the assumptions, complete where does unicast RPS strict mode fits. You never put unicast RPS strict mode on an AS boundary. Why did we do loose check? Because loose check wasn't about doing any anti-spoofing, it was a reaction tool. Why was VRF mode created? Because a lot of what you're asking to do right now is VRF mode. And why did we create flow spec? So you have to put this work within that context, then step back. And then also realize that feasible path was created because of how JTree is built versus how Cisco Ceph built. All right, so you got to go back to the original history of how these particular featurettes evolved based off of the vendor implementations.
Okay, I would be very interested to do that. If you can take a couple of minutes to put a few of those pointers on the list.
I think we just need to talk. There's a whole bunch of materials that you should be just doing Google searches to pull up and find.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. We're out of time. So we had a busy meeting this time, and we'll see you in Chicago, I guess. Thank you. Is it Randy's? No,
it's Joel's.
This is typical for us. It was like.
Oh, you.